plot of The Dark Descent follows the amnesiac protagonist Daniel as he explores the dark and foreboding Brennenburg Castle while trying to solve various puzzles, maintaining his sanity and avoiding monsters. Throughout the game, more and more of Daniel's past is revealed. Instead of fighting, Daniel's leading tools for survival include running and hiding. Amnesia is an exploration-based survival horror adventure game played from a first-person perspective. The player takes control of the amnesiac, Daniel, as he regains consciousness in the Brennenburg Castle, deep in the Prussian woods, with no memory of where he is or what he's doing there. Throughout the game, Daniel explores various areas of Brennenburg, solves puzzles, avoids enemies, and collects items, notes, and diary entries from which his diary gradually reveals the events that put him in the situation he finds himself in. Daniel stores these diary entries in his journal, along with notes he finds. In this journal, he will also jot down various hints and reminders, mementos, which he can remind the player of their current objectives. Some of the smaller items found in the game can be stored in the inventory menu. These items include consumables used to provide light to the surroundings or heal Daniel. Among these items are tinderboxes, one-time use items for lighting candles, lanterns, or fireplaces in the environment. Oil canisters, which can be used to refill the fuel of a small lantern, Daniel finds early on in the game and carries on his person. Or landum, which heals the player by 1 health level. Outside of these items, Daniel can also find various items used to solve puzzles, such as keys, canisters, or potion ingredients. There are no weapons and no combat mechanics in the game, leaving Daniel defenseless if an enemy is encountered. If an enemy spots Daniel, they will give chase, and if they catch up, they will usually kill him in 1 or 2 hits, which puts the game into a game over state and forces the player to either load a previous save or restart from where near the death occurred. This makes the primary methods of avoiding enemies hiding from them, for example by ducking down behind some barrels or in a nearby cupboard and waiting until the threat leaves the area. If an enemy nevertheless spots Daniel, the only alternative is to run away while attempting to break line of sight with the enemy long enough for it to lose track of Daniel. The player can improve their chances of escape by barricading their escape path, for instance by closing doors behind them or blockade entrances and exits to areas with objects such as boxes or barrels. The game, set in 1839, casts the player in the role of Daniel, a young man from London who awakens in the dark halls of Prussian Brennenburg Castle, near the village of Altstedt, with little to no memory of himself or his past. All he can remember is his name, that he lives in Mayfair, London, and something is hunting him. Chronologically, the game takes place between the events of the Remember short story, Waiting for the Rain, and the expansion of Amnesia, Justine. Shortly after waking, Daniel finds a note written by himself that explains how he purposely made himself forget the past because he couldn't handle losing his innocence, so he wanted to forget it all. The note urges Daniel to descend in the castle's inner sanctum and murder a man named Alexander, the Baron of the castle. The note gives final warning that a living nightmare is chasing him, and Daniel must escape for it as long as he can because there is no way to fight back. Daniel explores the castle. As he does, he occasionally finds a fleshy substance growing on the walls and doors, a sign of the nightmare getting closer and closer. Through the diary entries from Daniel's journal scattered around the rooms, the backstory of the castle and events that transpired there begin to come clear. Before he arrived at the castle, Daniel had gone on an archaeological expedition to Africa with his friend and colleague, Professor Herbert, to research an ancient burial chamber. Whilst there, Daniel had encountered a large underground chamber during a dig, much older than the one they had expected to find based on their research. A sudden collapse of stone had trapped Daniel inside the chamber where he began to suffocate, but he also experienced a strange vision of glowing blue spear of light. Attempting to grab it, he suddenly blacked out and soon woke up being rescued by Arab diggers with the piece of the ancient orb in his hands. Daniel returned to England at the request of Herbert and attempted to fit the pieces together, but was puzzled to find out that they did not fit together. Stranger, still, the pieces appeared to be changing shape and texture. To find out more, Daniel visited a famed geologist, Sir William Smith. The geologist was unsure of what was causing the changes, but had explained to Daniel that over the long periods, the glass changes shape. Later, Daniel received a letter about the fate of the expedition he had left behind, and it was revealed that the only empty campsite was found. Herbert and his men had vanished, and the lone survivor, who was grievously injured, kept rambling about something hunting down the expedition. Some of Herbert's journals were sent back to England, and Daniel picked them up. The majority of the notes were only quick scribblings at most, but Daniel was confused to see that Herbert wrote he was trapped for over an hour, despite beginning to choke almost immediately. Stranger still, Herbert claimed to have descended into the ancient chambers and retrieved the orb himself, making it impossible for Daniel to have the fragments. Daniel continues to explore the Brennenburg Castle and is soon hunted by disturbing, nightmarishly mutilated creatures as well as the Shadow. He also begins to experience visions of the events in the castle's past, including what Alexander, his target, had done in many of the chambers. Daniel is shocked to realize that Alexander had been performing inhumane experiments on animals to extract viate, a substance he saw as essential for some of the mystical ritual. He is also shown to be ruthless, even going as far as to poison and kill his men to prevent them from telling the outside world what he had been doing inside the castle. Daniel also experiences flashbacks, visions of himself and Alexander talking to one another. Presumably, on their way to the inner sanctum, Daniel continues his journey down into the depths of the castle through the use of Alexander's elevator, which takes him down to the underground prison of the area. Further diary entries show that despite being hunted by the nightmares every night, Daniel was able to reassemble the orb after waking from a nightmare. The object fitted together without any adhesive and sat in Daniel's drawing room in a complete form. Daniel went to Herbert's University to get some answers about the relic and saw Professor Taylor to find out more. He learned that the orbs appeared have left a mark on the English culture, even inspiring royal symbology. The orbs had supposedly, originally, been wielded by priests on his way out. He overheard a conversation from which he learned that William Smith had been killed only a fortnight after Daniel spoke to him. Through more flashbacks, Daniel learns that when he went to see Dr. Tate about his nightmares, he was not able to get a diagnosis. Days later, both Professor Taylor and Dr. Tate were killed in horrific ways, and this convinced Daniel that he was somehow to blame for their deaths. Thinking he would be next, Daniel tried contacting many names in Herbert's address books and received cryptic response from a baron in Prussia who claimed he could protect him from some unknown force, the letter signed by Alexander, and urged Daniel to come to Brennenburg Castle immediately. Once at the castle, Daniel began to assist Alexander in various tasks designed to keep the living nightmare away from him. Revealed to be a guardian of the orb, the Shadow would not take long to arrive, despite being described as sluggish. During the time, Daniel also allowed Alexander to use his orb in their attempted rituals to banish the Shadow later on. On a tour of the castle, Alexander revealed not only Brennenburg's function as a prison, but also the inmates would be used in arcane rituals needed to save Daniel. The Shadow began to draw even closer until finally, the particular failure of a ritual allowed it into the castle. Panicking, Daniel told Alexander he would do whatever it took to survive and unwittingly played right into the Baron's hands. Back in the current timeline, close to the inner sanctum, Daniel meets an old, frail man chained to the wall near the castle's laboratory. The man, Agrippa, a friend of Alexander's, who helped him gain a knowledge of the orb's powers many years ago. His consciousness is now trapped in a dead husk, so Alexander may use him as a source of information. Agrippa asks Daniel to create a concoction to set him free from his body and stop Alexander from using the orbs. Through finding the ingredients these things needed to carry on, Daniel finds himself in a part of the castle littered with torture rooms and bodily remains. Through flashbacks and more diary entries, it becomes clear why Daniel chose to lose his memories at the beginning of the game. Alexander began telling Daniel about the different methods of extracting viate from the prisoners, down in the castle depths, claiming the process would keep the Shadow away from him. Daniel followed him without question through his increasing desperation and helped perform gruesome rituals of killing prisoners through various methods of torture, thinking that he would save himself in the end in the process. Using such items as an Iron Maiden and a brass bowl, Daniel ended up becoming the very thing he was killing, and even went as far as to kidnap local villagers and children from the outside the castle for use for rituals. Consumed by grief, regret, and disgust at his actions, Daniel drank a memory-destroying amnesia toxin to have a fresh start and fix what he had done. He realized that Alexander had manipulated him to obtain the orb and to achieve his goal, and swore that the Baron would die for his actions, leading to the events at the start of the game. As he progresses, Daniel is attacked by a horde of creatures and locked up in one of the castle's prison cells. He hears Alexander speaking to him telepathically, thanking him for his role in everything and for keeping the shadow away from the Baron. At this point, it is possible to end the game. Alexander asks Daniel to wait in the cell and let the shadow consume him, and it is possible to do just that. The cell is filled with fleshy substance. Daniel will hear the voices of the people he's tortured, and the shadow will kill him. If Daniel manages to escape, he will be able to return to the laboratory and find the shadow's influence has grown over absolute everything. Agrippa asks Daniel for the potion. If the player has found the ingredients, then the potion can be made in the lab and fed to Agrippa. The old man then asks if his head can be cut off and taken with Daniel to stop Alexander and get into a portal before he does. If the player did not find the ingredients, then Daniel enters the inner sanctum alone and he uses the power of the orb to open the way and goes to complete his objective. Inside the massive chamber, Alexander awaits on a raised platform in front of one of the orbs, engulfed in a blue light glow. Surrounding the orb, there are 3 fragile pillars that are feeding the blue-hued energy to it to complete the ritual. Alexander thanks Daniel once again and rants about how he can finally return home once again. 3 possible endings to the game can happen at this point. If the player chooses to knock over the pillars, then the ritual fails. Alexander screams as his body disintegrates, and Daniel leaves the chamber. The shadow's influence is assumed to be gone through his redeeming actions, and he leaves Brennenburg Castle behind with a guilt-free conscience. If the player wishes to achieve this ending, then after Alexander finishes his speech, they have 2.5 minutes to do it. If the player does nothing at first, the portal Alexander wants to open appears as he begins to float towards it, leaving Daniel to face the shadow alone. If the player uses Agrippa's head on the portal, then the ritual will be completed before Alexander can get through, resulting in his death. Daniel is seemingly killed by the shadow, but wakes up in a darkness with a small blue lights visible in the distance. The voice of Agrippa assures him everything is going to be alright, and the game ends. Note that if Daniel has Agrippa's head, the player has 1 minute to decide the outcome, as it can still end in 3 ways depending on the player's actions. If the player does nothing at all, then the portal opens, Alexander enters it in a blue flash, with nothing holding the shadow back. The fleshy substance consumes the inner sanctum and kills Daniel slowly. The voices of his victims can be heard begging for mercy. The screen fades to black. The game ends with Alexander thanking Daniel and saying that his sacrifice will not be forgotten. The player can achieve a lesser-known 4th ending if he remains in the cell after being captured by the servants. Eventually, the shadow reaches the cell and is killed in the same style, and receives the same thanks from Alexander. The player has to wait about 20 minutes for that to happen, and the shadow will slowly engulf the cell with its fleshy substance until it kills Daniel, and once he hears the begging from his formerly tortured victims, it will be too late to escape the cell. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want more videos like this, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and hit that notification bell to see more. Goodbye now.